So the history of 42 U.S. 1983. This is a federal code, section 1983, is that it was passed 6 years after the Civil War had ended. The Civil War years are 1861 to 1865, and 42 U.S. section 1983 was passed on April 20th, 1871. And so that's 6 years after the Civil War was over. The Civil War is over. 6 years later, there is no more slavery, so you have a rise in the KKK movement, so they passed the Anti-KKK Act. It's also called the 1871 Civil Rights Act and something else, the Enforcement Act, the Force Act. So April 20th, 1871 is when 42 U.S. 1983 is going to be passed. Right after the Civil War, since black folks were no longer slaves, there was a rise in the lynchings of black folks. During the days of slavery, the legal code of white society was a dictatorship against black folks. The Alabama Slave Code of 1852 drafted all men from 18 years of age to 45 years of age to enforce slavery against black folks. So you were conscripted into the damn white supremacist totalitarian dictatorship. Democracy for the white folks, but slavery and oppression for the black folks. This is what was going on before the Civil War. That's the Alabama Slave Code of 1852. Now, slavery is going to end after the Civil War, but violence is going to be used as an intimidation to either A, make black folks get back on the farm, to submit, or to make them flee, or just as an outright genocidal weapon. And then there's going to be a great migration of black folks moving to the northern states, but that's going to be about 10 to 20% of black folks. What happened to most black folks in the South is they moved on the other side of the railroad tracks. They moved on the other side of the tracks. 90% of black folks today still live in the deep South. So there's a great migration, but there's also segregation. And this is when segregation becomes institutionalized. Why does any of this matter? Because the rise of the KKK happened simultaneously with segregation. They weren't slaves anymore, but the racist white supremacist wasn't going to let them have their day in the sun during Reconstruction. So Reconstruction is going to end 1877. So 1871 is right there in the middle of Reconstruction. It's going to be signed by U.S. Grant. So 1861 to 1865 is the Civil War. 1871 is when 42 U.S. Section 1983 is going to get passed. And then 1877, just 6 years later, is when it's going to end. Black folks and righteous anti-racist whites in the South were overwhelmingly members of the Republican Party, largely due to the Republican support for emancipation and for civil rights. Civil rights. Apparently, everybody gets a right to speak and everybody has a right to petition. So, let's see, I'm just looking at the time. I'm going to make this in, 25 minutes or so? So, 8:34. In 1866, the Ku Klux Klan was formed in Pulaski, Tennessee, by 6 ex-Confederates. So, they were sore losers, right? As the KKK spread through the South, it became more sinister and violent. KKK members attacked freed people exercising their new rights, as well as whites who supported the Republican Party. Their methods included burning black schools and churches, intimidating black and white Republican voters, even resorting to rape and murder. KKK members often would wear ghoulish disguises, committed their crimes at night, terrifying their victims. Worse, the Klan's goals were supported by many local officials as well as law enforcement, which meant that the Klan violence was rarely prosecuted at the state or local level. In 1866, you had a quarrel between racist whites and black ex-Union soldiers that erupted into a full-fledged riot in Memphis, Tennessee. What do you mean by a riot? It means a bunch of white policemen, a bunch of white fascists, a bunch of white supremacists had assisted mobs in their violent rampage against black sections of town. So black folks moved on the opposite side. A race riot was whenever they just went turkey shooting fish in the barrel. They just want to go into the black neighborhood and just wreak havoc. White policemen assisted the mobs in their violent rampage. 46 black folks are going to get killed in Memphis, Tennessee. So damn Tennessee, you created the Ku Klux Klan. You got a damn race riot. You're going to kill Martin Luther King Jr. 46 black folks are going to get killed. This is the year after the Civil War ended, 1866. 70 more were wounded, and numerous churches and schools had been burned. So they're not just killing black folks left and right, they're also burning down churches because they're a bunch of anti-Christian piles of shit. Yeah, what would Jesus do? He wouldn't burn down schools and churches. That is not what Jesus would do. And schools. So what's that about? What, black folks aren't allowed to learn their 3 R's, reading, writing, arithmetic. On July 30th, 1866, a similar outbreak of violence had erupted in New Orleans. This time, a white mob attacked the attendees of a black suffrage convention, killing 37 black folks and 3 righteous whites who allied with them. In this violent atmosphere, the Ku Klux Klan grew in size and strength. By 1868, the Klan had evolved into a hooded terrorist organization that its members called the Invisible Empire of the South. The reorganized Klan's first leader or Grand Wizard was Nathan Bedford Forrest, who was a Confederate general during the Fort Pillow Massacre in the U.S. Civil War, where a mass slaughtering of black troops had happened in spite of them surrendering. Oh yeah, well, you surrendered. Well, they don't have any quartering for. Your skin was the wrong color, Mr. Black Man. And then you took up arms against the white man. How dare you? What are you trying to get our slaves to rebel against us? And then the Civil War is just going to end. I heard a quote by John Surratt Jr., who was allegedly a part of the conspiracy to kill Lincoln. He had said that it just went right out. It didn't even flicker. And I guess when you're fighting for an evil fucking purpose, you're fighting for white supremacy and to maintain slavery, you're going to pretend that the black man isn't a man, which is wrong. He's actually the original man, and Caucasians are the mutated albinos of the original African man. Of course they're humans. Of course they are Homo sapiens. Do black and white folks, when they have sex, do they not create a baby? Yeah, if you've concluded that the black man is not a man, then you've concluded wrong. And you're also not only dumbass pieces of shit, you're also wicked as fuck. So Nathan Bedford Forrest was a piece of shit as a Confederate and a piece of shit as a citizen. He created the KKK. Or he was the Grand Wizard, the first Grand Wizard. July 14th, 1868, the 1868 South Carolina Constitution, also known as the Reconstruction Constitution, witnessed more than half of the 124 delegates were African American. How exciting! In South Carolina, more than half of the Constitutional Convention were black folks. My God, this is a bright, shining moment in American history. We are giving black folks the right to vote. They're going to get some property, get their own farmland. They're going to get their 40 acres and a mule, and they're going to be productive members in society. Not if the Ku Klux Klan and the white supremacists have their way. The new 1868 South Carolina Constitution, the convention was held in Charleston, South Carolina. The new 1868 South Carolina Constitution that mostly black folks had written up, number 1, removed racial and property barriers to voting. Number 2, granted women the right to divorce. Number 3, established a popular vote for the governor. Number 4, removed property ownership as a prerequisite for holding elective office. Number 5, abolished debtor's prison. Number 6, no provision was entered against interracial marriage. And number 7, all public schools were open to all the races. After a supermajority of 28 of the 37 states had endorsed the 14th Amendment, the 14th Amendment was ratified on July 9th, 1868 and became law. So we're getting closer and closer to 42 U.S. Section 1983. That's going to happen April 20th, 1871. In the run-up to the presidential election of 1868 in Arkansas, over 2,000 murders were committed in connection with the election. In Georgia, the number of threats and beatings was even higher. And in Louisiana, 1,000 black folks were killed as the election neared. In those 3 states, Arkansas, Georgia, and Louisiana, Democrats won decisive victories at the polls. Members of the KKK terrorized black folks and righteous whites for exercising their right to vote, running for public office, and serving on juries. Ulysses S. Grant is going to become the nation's 18th president on March 4th, 1869. Abraham Lincoln is killed. Then you have Andrew Johnson, one of the worst presidents ever. Finally, we get U.S. Grant in there. U.S. Grant is going to hopefully carry on Lincoln's legacy. You got this incredible Congress that Lincoln was able to get in there. March 4th, 1869, U.S. Grant becomes president. Again, we're still seeing violence. We saw that violence that happened in 1866 in Memphis, Tennessee, and New Orleans, Louisiana. Now we're seeing over 2,000 murders. Were going to happen in 1868 in Arkansas, and it was connected to the presidential election. U.S. Grant was victorious. And in Georgia, the threats and the beatings were higher. In Louisiana, 1,000 black folks were killed as the election got nearer. And then in Arkansas, Georgia, and Louisiana, the fucking Democrats took over. Addressing the nation during his first inaugural address, President Grant asked all American citizens to approach the future calmly, without prejudice, hate, or sectional pride. On December 5th, 1870, Ulysses S. Grant gave his second State of the Union. And what did U.S. Grant say? Well, U.S. Grant said to the Senate and the House of Representatives, "A year of peace and general prosperity to this nation has passed since the last assembling of Congress. We have, through a kind providence, been blessed with abundant crops and have been spared from complications and war with foreign nations. In our midst, comparative harmony has been restored. It is to be regretted, however, that a free exercise of the elective franchise has, by violence and intimidation, been denied to citizens in exceptional cases in several of the states, largely in rebellion, and the verdict of the people has thereby been reversed." They used intimidation and violence in order to get their damn way. Didn't we see a Confederate flag in the motherfucking nation's capital? What was it, the White House? No, it was in the Capitol, in the Congress. We had a Confederate fucking flag. Even during the Civil War, we didn't have a Confederate flag in there. So U.S. Grant is recognizing that you got violence probably in Arkansas, Georgia, and Louisiana. The Democrats, the fucking Democrats, the KKK white supremacist fucking Democrats cheated. They cheated. You want to talk about election integrity? Thank God that the Republicans won in 1869, and we got U.S. Grant. The states of Virginia, Mississippi, and Texas have been restored to representation in our national councils. So we're trying to get these states back into the Union. Virginia, Mississippi, and Texas did everything that they needed. Now they're part of America again. Georgia, the only state now without representation, may confidently be expected to take her place. They're also at the beginning of the new year, and then let us hope will be completed the work of reconstruction with acquiescence, when an acquiescence on the part of the whole people and the national obligation to pay the public debt created as the price of our union, the pensions to our disabled soldiers and sailors and their widows and orphans, and in the changes to the Constitution which have been made necessary by a great rebellion, there is no reason why we should not advance in material prosperity and happiness as no other nation ever did after so protracted and devastating a war. Between 1870 and 1871, the U.S. Congress passed 2 enforcement acts, which made it a crime to interfere with the registration, the voting, the office holding, and the jury service of black folks. Well, how do you think the damn KKK white supremacist fucking Democrats are they're gonna hate that? More than 5,000 people were indicted under these laws, and a little more than 1,000 were convicted. The Enforcement Act of May 1870 prohibited banding together or going in disguise upon the public highways or upon the premises of another to violate a citizen's constitutional rights. Why would anybody band together going around in disguise? All the fucking hooded Klan, those KKK cowards, they're known for their fucking hoods. So the first Enforcement Act was a shot across the bow against the KKK. The Second Force Act of February 1871. We're getting closer and closer to April 20th, 1871. The Second Force Act, February 1871, put federal elections under federal supervision, mainly by federal judges and U.S. Marshals. On March 9th, 1871, President U.S. Grant writes to the Speaker of the House, James G. Blaine, and suggests suggests that Congress pass another law for providing means for the protection of life and property. Where civil unrest had continued, this is U.S. Grant again. He's speaking from the dead. There is a deplorable state of affairs existing in some portions of the South demanding the immediate attention of Congress. If the attention of Congress can be confined to the single subject of providing means for the protection of life and property in those sections of the country where the present civil authority fails to secure that end, I feel that we should have such legislation. To combat the reign of terror by the KKK, we're going to pass another Force Act, the third Force Act of April 71. Here, we finally got to it. April 1871, the third Force Act, the Anti-KKK Act, the Civil Rights Act of 1871 is going to get passed, empowering President U.S. Grant to suspend habeas corpus and use the U.S. military to enforce these acts. Malcolm X had said, we already had 3 or 4 Civil Rights Acts in the past. What makes us think that the Civil Rights Act of 1964 is going to hold up? We've already passed Civil Rights Act, and they went nowhere. Among those who voted in support of the Anti-KKK Act, the Third Force Act, the Civil Rights Act of April 20th, 1871, were African-American Congressmen Robert D. Large, Robert B. Elliott, Joseph Rainey, Benjamin S. Turner, and Josiah T. Walls. On April 20th, 1871, the Third Enforcement Act, a.k.a. Civil Rights Act of 1871, a.k.a. the Anti-KKK Act, is passed and signed into law by President U.S. Grant. Hip hip hooray, we finally got to, this is 42 U.S. Section 1983, which is used still today to enforce civil rights. The Anti-KKK Act of 1871 allowed the U.S. government to act against terrorist organizations. The Anti-Ku Klux Klan Act helped both the newly freed black folks as well as righteous white folks who thought black folks were human beings and Americans to boot, and therefore they were afforded every human and American right the rest of everybody else in America had, especially the right to vote safely and securely. The Third Force Act, a.k.a. the Anti-KKK Act, a.k.a. the Civil Rights Act of 1871, empowered President Ulysses S. Grant to use the armed forces to combat those who conspire to deny equal protection of the laws, and if necessary, to suspend habeas corpus to enforce the act. In 1871, Congress passed and President Grant signed the Civil Rights Act of 1871. Section 1 of that act, now codified at 42 U.S.C. Section 1983. It created a species of federal tort liability for individuals to sue state and local officers for the deprivations of constitutional rights. Thompson v. Clark, 2022. After the 1871 Anti-KKK Act's passage, the U.S. President for the first time had the power to suppress state disorders on his own initiative and suspend the right of habeas corpus. President U.S. Grant did not hesitate to use this authority. On May 3, 1871, U.S. Grant issued a proclamation warning that KKK terrorism wasn't going to be tolerated under his administration. President U.S. Grant tried to appeal to the people of the South. I do particularly exhort the people of those parts of the country to suppress all such combinations of lawlessness by their own voluntary efforts and to maintain the rights of all citizens of the United States to secure to all such citizens the equal protection of the laws. I will not hesitate to exhaust the powers thus vested in the executive whenever and wherever it shall become necessary to do so for the purpose of securing to all citizens of the United States the peaceful enjoyment of the rights guaranteed to them by the Constitution and the laws. Amos Ackerman was President Ulysses S. Grant's Attorney General. Hey, can y'all keep it down? I'm trying to give a speech in here. Can you keep it down? Can you knock it off? You're barking up and it's kind of drowning out what I'm trying to say here. I can't even think. Knock it off. Knock it off. Ackerman oversaw a federal investigation of the KKK. So he's only going to be the Attorney General for about a year and a half, from June 1870 to December 1871. On October 12, 1871, U.S. Grant put 9 counties in mostly upstate South Carolina where KKK terrorism was rampant under martial law, and thousands of terrorists were arrested. Detachments of the 7th U.S. Cavalry were stationed in the area and worked to gather info and intel on local Klan activities. The military and the U.S. Marshals then rounded up suspected KKK members for trial. The military worked with the Department of Justice and Amos Ackerman to prosecute KKK members suspected of engaging in violent terrorism. On October 29, 1870, Louis Foy wrote to President Ulysses S. Grant. Louis Foy was a formerly enslaved African American who now owned a 20-acre farm in Terrell County, Georgia. Facing terroristic threats from the Ku Klux Klan, Louis Foy described his terrifying ordeal. I was badly beaten and shot in my own house by some white rebels, unable to get protection from the local justice of the peace. I wish to appeal to you as my president, wrote Foy. During Reconstruction, countless African Americans living in the South sought the help of new federal laws protecting citizenship and voting rights. Amos Ackerman personally led the U.S. Marshals and the U.S. Army against the KKK after President Grant had suspended habeas corpus in the 9 South Carolina counties in October 1871. Over the next few months, Ackerman successfully indicted 3,000 KKK members throughout the South, 600 of whom were later convicted of crimes. Ackerman's actions helped destroy the KKK and ensured that local, state, and federal elections were free and fair. President U.S. Grant's third State of the Union address was given on December 4th, 1871. There has been imposed upon the executive branch of the government the execution of the Act of Congress approved April 20th, 1871, and commonly known as the Ku Klux Law, the Anti-KKK Law. In a portion of the state of South Carolina, the necessity of the course pursued will be demonstrated by the report of the Committee to Investigate Southern Outrages. Under the provision of the above act, I issued a proclamation calling the attention of the people of the United States to do the same, and declaring my reluctance to exercise any of the extraordinary powers thereby conferred upon me except in case of imperative necessity, but making known my purpose to exercise such powers whenever it should become necessary to do so, for the purpose of securing to all citizens of the United States the peaceful enjoyment of the rights guaranteed to them by the Constitution and the laws. After the passage of this law, information was received from time to time that combinations of the character referred to in this law existed and were powerful in many parts of the southern states, particularly in certain counties in the state of South Carolina. Careful investigation was made, and it was ascertained that in 9 counties of that state such combinations were active and powerful, embracing a sufficient portion of the citizens to control the local authority, and having, among other things, the object of depriving the emancipated class of the substantial benefits of freedom and of preventing the free political action of those citizens who did not sympathize with their own views. Among their operations were frequent scourgings and occasional assassinations, generally perpetuated at night by disguised persons, cowards, the victims in almost all cases being citizens of different political sentiments from their own or freed persons who had shown a disposition to claim equal rights with other citizens. Thousands of inoffensive and well-disposed citizens were the sufferers by this lawless violence. Thereupon, on October 12, 1871, a proclamation was issued in terms of the law, calling upon the members of those combinations to disperse within 5 days and to deliver to the marshal or military officers of the United States all arms, ammunition, uniforms, disguises, and other means and implements used by them for carrying out their unlawful purposes. This warning not having been heeded, on the 17th of October, another proclamation was issued suspending the privileges of writ of habeas corpus in 9 counties in that state. Direction was given that within the counties so designated, persons supposed upon creditable information to be members of such unlawful combinations should be arrested, by the military forces of the United States and delivered to the marshal to be dealt with according to law. In 2 of said counties, York and Spartanburg, many arrests have been made. At the last account, the number of persons thus arrested was 168. Several hundred whose criminality was ascertained to be of an inferior degree were released for the present. These have generally made confessions of their guilt. Great caution has been exercised in making these arrests, and notwithstanding the large number, it is believed that no innocent person is now in custody. The prisoners will be held for regular trial in the judicial tribunals of the United States of America. As soon as it appeared that the authorities of the United States were about to take vigorous measures to enforce the law, many persons absconded. And there's good ground for supposing that all of such persons have violated the law. A full report of what has been done under this law will be submitted to Congress by the Attorney General. In Utah, there still remains a remnant of barbarism repugnant to civilization, to decency, and to the laws of the United States. Territorial officers, however, have been found who are willing to perform their duty in a spirit of equity and with a due sense of the necessity of sustaining the majesty of the law. Neither polygamy nor any other violation of existing statutes will be permitted within the territory of the United States. It is not with the religion of the self-styled saints that we are now dealing, but with their practices. They will be protected in the worship of God according to the dictates of their consciences, but they will not be permitted to violate the laws under the cloak of religion. At the end of 1871, Amos Ackerman resigned as Attorney General, which ended the federal government's crackdown of the KKK. Many convicted KKK members were given light sentences. Later, the increasing takeover by the Democrats of state and local governments made the Klan less relevant because white supremacists had gained control of the laws in the South. U.S. Grant's order saw hundreds of Klan members arrested. Convictions proved difficult to obtain, and the financial panic of 1873 would distract the North from the problems of Southern racism. U.S. Grant's decisive action temporarily reestablished law and order in the South, allowing African Americans and those who supported them some relief from the horrific violence surrounding their communities. The Mississippi Plan, however, of 1874 to 75 is that when cruelty and intimidation and criminal violence was used at the ballot box, it worked. Black folks and righteous whites stayed away from voting, and ultimately the white supremacists got to elect their guys back into office. Many of these white supremacists were ex-Confederates. Reconstruction ended in 1877 because the election between Rutherford B. Hayes and Sam Tilden was close. Rutherford B. Hayes, the Republican, got to become president, but only because he compromised on one point: the withdrawal of U.S. troops in the South. In 1882, the United States Supreme Court declared much of the Anti-KKK Act unconstitutional. In 1883, the U.S. Supreme Court unanimously held that it was unconstitutional for the federal government to penalize crimes such as assault and murder. It declared that the local governments have the power to penalize these crimes. In the United States v. Harris 1883 decision, also known as the KKK case, 4 men were kidnapped from a Crockett County, Tennessee jail led by County Sheriff R.G. Harris, a member of the KKK. The 4 men were beaten and one of them were killed. A deputy sheriff tried but failed to prevent what occurred. SCOTUS ruled that an act to enforce the Constitution's Equal Protection Clause applied only to state action and not to state inaction. Under this thinking, the 14th Amendment authorized the federal government to take remedial action only when state actions, not those of individuals, violated the amendment. In U.S. v. Harris 1883, Justice Woods wrote the 8-1 majority opinion for SCOTUS. It is perfectly clear from the language of the first section that its purpose also was to place a restraint upon the action of the states. In the slaughterhouse cases, 16 Wall 36, it was held by the majority of the court, speaking through Mr. Justice Miller, that the object of the second clause of the first section of the 14th Amendment was to protect from the hostile legislation of the states the privilege and immunities of citizens of the United States, and this was conceded by Mr. Justice Field, who expressed the views of the dissenting justices in that case. In the same case, the court, referring to the 14th Amendment, said that if the states do not conform their laws to its requirements, then by the 5th section of the Article of Amendment, Congress was authorized to enforce it by suitable legislation. Justice Harlan dissented against U.S. Harris 1883 without comment. Although provisions were ruled unconstitutional in 1883, the 1870 Force Act and the 1871 Civil Rights Act have been invoked in later civil rights conflicts, including the 1964 murders of Cheney, Goodman, and Schwerner, and the 1965 murder of Viola Lee Uzi. The Anti-KKK Act was also used in Tinker v. Des Moines, 1969. By the time Beth Tinker was in school, the law had expanded to make school boards liable if they stood in the way of people's federally protected rights. The act was invoked in the Robbins v. Lower Merion School District 2010 case, where plaintiffs charged 2 suburban Philadelphia high schools secretly spied on students by surreptitiously and remotely activating webcams embedded in school-issued laptops the students were using at home, violating the right to privacy. Robbins v. Lower Merion School District. Violating the right to privacy, the schools admitted to snapping over 66,000 web shots and screenshots secretly, including webcam shots of students in their bedrooms. The Supreme Court case Neves v. Bartlett, 2019, Neves v. Bartlett, ruled that in general, when probable cause for an arrest exists, it overrides a First Amendment retaliatory arrest claim arising under Section 1983, but that there were some narrow exceptions to this. So that's some history of 42 U.S. Section 1983.